While I was on vacation, my daughter sold my estate to her boss. She threw my bags on the street. "You're too old for this luxury." Shaking, I called the buyer, a boy I once adopted. Nobody knew he was now a tycoon. When he landed his helicopter on the lawn and said, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My name is Rosalie, and I'm 71 years old. I never imagined that returning from what should have been a peaceful vacation would become the most humiliating day of my life. The taxi pulled up to 1847 Elm Street, the same address I'd called home for 32 years. But something was wrong. My suitcases weren't where they should be, safely inside my Victorian house. Instead, they sat on the sidewalk like abandoned trash, my clothes spilling from a broken zipper. "Ma'am, this is your stop, right?" The driver turned around, confusion clear in his voice as he stared at the luggage scattered on my front lawn. I nodded slowly, my throat suddenly dry. "Yes, this is. This is my house." But even as I said the words, doubt crept in. The spare key wasn't under the flower pot where I'd left it. The front door had a shiny new lock that my key couldn't open. And there, standing in my doorway like she owned the place, was my daughter Calla. "Mom, you're back." Her voice carried no warmth, no surprise, no guilt. Just cold acknowledgement, like I was a neighbor she barely tolerated. I paid the taxi driver with trembling hands and walked toward my own front door, feeling like a stranger. "Calla, what's going on? Why are my things outside?" She stepped onto the porch, her arms crossed, wearing that expression I remembered from her teenage years when she was about to deliver news she knew would hurt me. Behind her, I could see Ronan, her husband, hovering in the shadows like he always did when there was family drama. "We need to talk, Mom, about your living situation." "My living situation?" I repeated the words, but they felt foreign in my mouth. "This is my house, Calla. I've lived here since before you were born." "Actually," Ronan stepped forward, holding a manila folder. "Legally speaking, that's no longer accurate." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" Calla sighed, like I was being deliberately difficult. "Mom, we sold the house. You agreed to it before you left for Florida. Don't you remember?" The world tilted sideways. I gripped the porch railing to keep from falling. "I never agreed to anything. I would never—" "You signed the papers, Mom." Ronan opened the folder, revealing documents I'd never seen before. "Right here, your signature. The sale was finalized yesterday." I stared at the papers, at what looked like my handwriting, at numbers that made no sense. $800,000 was what my house was worth according to the last appraisal. But these papers showed $600,000. Even in my shocked state, I knew something was terribly wrong. "I didn't sign these," I whispered. "I would never sell my house without telling you first, and I certainly wouldn't sell it for less than it's worth." Calla's expression hardened. "Mom, you're 71 years old. Maybe your memory isn't what it used to be. We have witnesses. We have your signature. This is legal and final." The cruelty in her voice hit me like a physical blow. This was my daughter, the child I'd raised, supported through college, helped through her divorce from her first husband. The daughter I'd welcomed back home when she had nowhere else to go, along with Ronan when they married 8 years ago. "Who bought it?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Mr. Thompson from downtown. He runs that big development company. He paid cash, which is why we could close so quickly." Ronan spoke with the confidence of someone who'd planned every detail. "But where am I supposed to live?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Calla spoke, and her words cut deeper than any knife could. "Mom, you're too old to maintain a house this size. It's too much responsibility, too much space for one person. We found you a nice assisted living facility. They have activities, people your own age. You'll be much happier." "You found me?" I couldn't finish the sentence. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that I couldn't process it all at once. The paperwork is already filed, Ronan added, as if discussing a business transaction. Your room is available starting Monday. We'll help you pack your essentials. I looked around at my belongings scattered on the lawn, my favorite reading chair, the one I'd bought after my husband died 25 years ago, the small oak table where I'd helped Michael with his homework when he was a boy, the wedding china I'd inherited from my mother, now sitting in cardboard boxes like garage sale items. Michael, I said suddenly, remembering. Did you call Michael? Does he know about this? Calla's face tightened at the mention of his name. Even after all these years, she couldn't hide her resentment toward the boy I'd adopted when she was 25. Michael isn't family, Mom. Not really. This is a decision for blood family to make. The words hit me like a slap. Michael, who'd lived in this house for 8 years. Michael, who'd called me every week since he'd moved away for college. Michael, who'd never once asked me for money or made me feel like a burden. According to my own daughter, he wasn't family. You can't do this, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they already had. It's done, Mom. Calla's voice softened slightly, but there was no real warmth in it. Look, I know this is hard, but it's for the best. You'll see. Neighbors had started to gather, drawn by the unusual sight of furniture on the sidewalk. Mrs. Patterson from next door approached cautiously. Rosalie, dear, is everything all right? The humiliation burned in my chest. How could I explain that my own daughter had sold my house out from under me? That I was being treated like an unwanted piece of furniture myself? Everything's fine, I managed to say, though my voice shook with the lie. Mrs. Patterson looked confused, her eyes moving from me to the scattered belongings to Calla's defiant face. If you need anything. She's fine, Calla interrupted. We're just helping Mom transition to a more suitable living arrangement. I watched Mrs. Patterson retreat, probably rushing home to call her other neighbors with the gossip. Rosalie's daughter kicked her out. Did you see all her things on the lawn? Where are my keys? I asked suddenly. My house keys? You won't need them anymore, Ronan said simply. The finality of it all crashed over me like a wave. I had no keys to my own home. I had no home. My belongings were literally scattered on the street like trash. My daughter stood in the doorway of the house I'd paid for, worked for, lived in for 3 decades, telling me I no longer belonged there. I thought about the 10 days I'd spent in Florida, visiting my sister Margaret. How I'd enjoyed the sunshine, the quiet walks on the beach, the simple pleasure of reading a book without any responsibilities. I'd come home refreshed, ready to tend to my rose garden and catch up with my neighbors. Instead, I'd come home to find that I no longer had a home. This isn't legal, I said, though I had no idea if that was true. You can't just sell someone else's house. The house was in your name, but you signed it over, Ronan explained patiently, like he was talking to a child. We have power of attorney for situations like this. You agreed to it last year, remember? When you had that small stroke? I did remember signing papers after my mini-stroke, but I'd thought they were just medical directives. I'd trusted Calla to handle my affairs if something happened to me. I'd never imagined she'd use those documents to steal my home. The stroke didn't affect my judgment, I said firmly. Dr. Martinez said I made a complete recovery. Mom, you're being dramatic. Calla stepped back into the house, my house that was no longer mine. We did this because we love you and want what's best for you. Love. She used that word like it meant something, like it could justify this betrayal. I stood there on the sidewalk, surrounded by my possessions, feeling smaller and more powerless than I had since I was a child. The afternoon sun beat down on my pearl necklace, the one my mother had given me on my wedding day. I touched it nervously, a habit I'd developed over the years whenever I felt overwhelmed. 71 years of life, and my own daughter had thrown me out on the street like garbage. But as I stood there, something else began to stir beneath the shock and humiliation. anger, deep, burning anger at the injustice of it all. I'd raised Calla, supported her, loved her unconditionally. I'd worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for this house, to build something stable for our family. And this was how she repaid me. I pulled my cell phone from my purse with shaking hands. There was one person who might help me, one person who'd never treated me like I was disposable. It was time to call Michael. Standing there on the sidewalk with my entire life spread out like a yard sale, I felt the weight of every neighbor's stare. The Hendersons from across the street had stepped onto their porch, whispering behind their hands. Old Mr. Chen from 2 houses down was pretending to water his plants while obviously listening to every word. This was my neighborhood. These were people I'd known for decades, people whose children I'd watched grow up, whose pets I'd fed when they traveled. Now they were all witnesses to my daughter's betrayal. "Mom, you're causing a scene," Calla hissed from the doorway. "People are staring." "Of course they're staring." My voice cracked with emotion. Their neighbor just got kicked out of her own home. Ronan stepped forward, his voice artificially calm and reasonable. "Mrs. Matthews, please understand that this transition might be difficult, but it's necessary. We've been concerned about you living alone in such a large house. What if you fell? What if there was an emergency?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I'd been living alone just fine for 25 years since my husband died. That I'd raised his wife when she was a rebellious teenager who came home drunk and throwing up. That I'd worked as a trauma nurse for 40 years, handling emergencies that would make his corporate job look like kindergarten. Instead, I found myself defending my own competence to my son-in-law on my own front lawn. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I drive, I cook, I maintain this house. I just got back from a 10-day vacation that I planned and executed entirely on my own." "But for how much longer?" Calla's voice took on that patient tone she used when she thought she was being reasonable. "Mom, you're 71. Things are only going to get harder." The way she said my age, like it was a disease, like reaching 71 somehow erased my right to make my own decisions. I thought about my sister Margaret, who was 75 and still teaching yoga classes. I thought about Mrs. Chen, who was 83 and still drove herself to the grocery store every week. "Show me the papers again," I demanded. "I want to see exactly what I supposedly signed." Ronan glanced at Calla before opening the manila folder. The documents looked official, full of legal language I didn't understand. But there, at the bottom of several pages, was what looked like my signature. Except something was wrong with it. The R in Rosalie was too looped, and I always dotted my I with a small circle, not a dot. These signatures had dots. "This isn't my handwriting," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "Mom, you signed these 3 weeks ago, right before your trip. Maybe you were distracted, thinking about your vacation." Calla's explanation sounded rehearsed. 3 weeks ago. I tried to remember what I'd been doing 3 weeks ago. Packing for Florida, yes, but signing papers to sell my house? Never. Who witnessed my signature? Another glance passed between Calla and Ronan. "I did," Ronan said. "And my colleague from work, David Peterson." "I don't know any David Peterson." "You met him at our barbecue last month. Tall guy, wore a blue shirt." I remembered the barbecue, a tense affair where I'd felt like an outsider in my own backyard. Ronan had invited several people from his office, corporate types who talked about stock portfolios and vacation homes. But I couldn't remember meeting anyone named David Peterson, and I certainly hadn't signed any documents at a family gathering. "I want to see this David Peterson. I want to talk to him myself." "That's not necessary," Calla said quickly. "The sale is final. The new owner has already moved in." "Moved in?" I looked past them into the house. "Someone's already living in my house?" "Mr. Thompson took possession yesterday. He's renovating." That explained the new lock, the sense that the house already felt different. In 24 hours, my home of 32 years had become someone else's property. I looked around at my scattered belongings, really seeing them for the first time. My favorite armchair, the blue one where I'd spent countless evenings reading. The small bookshelf where I kept my collection of mystery novels. The framed photographs that had sat on my dresser, including the picture of 8-year-old Michael grinning at the camera after his first day of school. Michael. The boy who'd come into our lives when Kala was already 25 and married to her first husband. I'd been 51, settled in my routines as a widow, when the social worker called about an 8-year-old who needed emergency placement. Just for a few weeks, they'd said, until we can find a more permanent situation. But one look at Michael's solemn dark eyes, the way he clutched a small backpack containing everything he owned, and I knew those few weeks would stretch much longer. Kala hadn't been happy about it. "Mom, you're too old to start over with a kid," she'd argued. "And I'm trying to get pregnant. What if you don't have time for your real grandchildren because you're busy with some stranger's child?" But Michael hadn't been a stranger for long. He was quiet at first, polite to the point of heartbreak, like he was afraid that any mistake would get him sent away. He did his homework without being asked, cleared his plate after every meal, and never complained about anything. It took months before he called me anything other than ma'am. Even longer before he stopped apologizing for existing. I remembered the night, about 6 months after he'd arrived, when I'd found him crying in his room after a nightmare. When I'd sat on his bed and rubbed his back until he fell asleep, he'd whispered, "Thank you, Mom." Mom. Not ma'am or Mrs. Matthews. Mom. Kala had never forgiven me for that moment, for the way my heart had expanded to include this lost boy who needed me. She'd interpreted my love for Michael as love taken away from her, even though she was a grown woman with her own life by then. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Kala's voice cut through my memories. "Michael isn't here, Mom. He can't swoop in and save you this time." Save me from what? From my own daughter? Save you from reality. You can't live alone anymore. You need help, and we're the ones trying to help you. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. If they wanted to help me, why was I standing on the sidewalk while strangers lived in my house? Why hadn't anyone discussed this alleged sale with me beforehand? Why did I feel like I was in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from? "Where's Michael now?" I asked, partly to deflect from my helplessness and partly because I genuinely wanted to know. "Last I heard, he was in Seattle doing something with computers," Kala said dismissively. "Probably still playing video games and pretending it's a career." That couldn't be right. Michael had always been brilliant with technology, but he'd also been incredibly driven. The last time we'd talked, about 3 months ago, he'd mentioned expanding his business. He'd sounded successful, confident. More successful than Ronan, whose job seemed to involve a lot of meetings and very little actual work. "I'm going to call him," I announced. "Mom, don't." Kala's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something that looked like panic. "You'll just upset yourself, and him. This isn't his problem to solve." But her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She was afraid of Michael getting involved, which meant she knew on some level that what they were doing was wrong. I fumbled in my purse for my phone, my hands still shaking from shock and anger. Michael's number was programmed in under M for Michael, but also under S for son, because that's what he'd become, even without legal papers or blood relation. The phone rang once, twice. I held my breath, praying he would answer, praying he could somehow help me make sense of this nightmare. When his voice came through the line, warm and familiar despite the years and distance, I nearly broke down crying. "Rosalie? Is everything okay?" Even from thousands of miles away, he could tell something was wrong, just from the sound of my breathing. "Michael," I whispered, turning away from Kala and Ronan so they couldn't see my tears. "I need help. Something terrible has happened." My fingers trembled as I dialed the number. I had to try. Michael was my only hope. "Michael, thank God you answered." My voice broke as I spoke into the phone, trying to keep my back turned to Calla and Ronan, who were watching me like hawks from the porch. "Rosalie, what's wrong? You sound upset." His voice was deeper now than when he'd left for college 12 years ago, but it still carried that gentle concern that had made me fall in love with him as a son. "They sold my house, Michael. Calla and Ronan sold my house while I was in Florida. They're saying I signed papers, but I never signed anything. I'm standing on the sidewalk with all my belongings scattered around like garbage." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Michael, are you there?" "I'm here." His voice had changed, become harder somehow. "Tell me exactly what happened." So I did. I told him about coming home to find my suitcases on the lawn, about the new locks, about the papers with signatures that didn't look quite right. I told him about Ronan's manila folder and the mysterious buyer named Mr. Thompson, who'd apparently paid $600,000 cash for my $800,000 home. "Thompson," Michael repeated, and something in his tone made me pause. "Do you know him?" Another long pause. "I might." "Rosalie, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't sign anything else. Don't agree to move anywhere. Don't let them pressure you into making any more decisions. They want to put me in assisted living. They say the paperwork is already filed. No." The word came out sharp, almost angry. "They can't force you into assisted living if you don't want to go. That's not how it works." Behind me, I could hear Calla talking to Ronan in low, urgent tones. I caught fragments. Calling him was a mistake. Should have disconnected the phone. "Michael, they're acting strange about me calling you. Calla doesn't want you involved." "I'm sure she doesn't." There was something bitter in his laugh. "Rosalie, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. This Mr. Thompson who bought your house, did they give you any contact information for him?" "They said he runs a development company downtown. But Michael, I don't understand why that matters. I just need help figuring out how to get my house back." "What if I told you that I might be able to help with that?" Hope fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird. "How? You're in Seattle, and this is a legal matter. I probably need a lawyer, but I don't know how I'm going to pay for one." "Don't worry about lawyers right now. Just trust me, okay? I'm going to make some calls, and then I'm going to come see you." "Come see me?" "Michael, you can't just drop everything and fly across the country. You have your business to run." "Rosalie." His voice was gentle again, the way it used to sound when he was trying to convince me to let him help with dishes or yard work. "You took care of me when I had nobody. You gave me a home when no one else would. Do you really think I wouldn't do the same for you?" Tears started flowing down my cheeks. After the coldness from Calla and the calculating cruelty from Ronan, Michael's warmth felt like sunshine after months of winter. "Besides," he continued, and I could hear something that sounded almost like amusement in his voice, "I have some business to take care of in town anyway. Consider it killing two birds with one stone." "What kind of business?" "The kind that involves Mr. Thompson and his development company." Before I could ask what he meant by that cryptic comment, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A sound I recognized but couldn't quite place at first. A rhythmic beating in the distance, getting closer. "Michael, do you hear that?" "Hear what?" The sound was getting louder now, and I realized what it was. A helicopter. In our quiet suburban neighborhood, helicopters were rare enough that people came out of their houses to look when one passed overhead. "There's a helicopter coming this way," I told him, feeling slightly ridiculous for mentioning it. "Is there?" His voice was carefully neutral. How interesting. The helicopter was definitely getting closer. The noise was loud enough now that I had to raise my voice to be heard over it. "Michael, I should probably let you go. This thing is so loud I can barely hear you." "Actually, Rosalie, why don't you stay on the line for just a minute longer? I think you're going to want to hear what I have to tell you." "What do you mean?" "Look up." I tilted my head back and saw a sleek black helicopter approaching our street. As I watched, it began to descend, clearly looking for a place to land. The noise was incredible now, and I could see neighbors coming out of their houses all up and down the block. "Michael, this helicopter is about to land in our neighborhood. I've never seen anything like this. Haven't you?" His voice was warm with something that sounded suspiciously like laughter. "Rosalie, I need you to look at the side of that helicopter. What do you see?" I squinted against the wind from the rotors, holding my hand up to shield my eyes. On the side of the black aircraft, I could just make out letters. TC Enterprises. TC Enterprises, I read aloud. "Michael, what does that stand for?" "Thompson Consolidated." My heart stopped. "Thompson, as in Mr. Thompson who bought my house?" "That's right. But how do you know about his helicopter? How do you know about his company?" The helicopter was setting down now in the small park at the end of our street, the one where I used to take Michael to play when he was younger. I could see a figure inside the cockpit, but the tinted windows made it impossible to make out any details. "Rosalie," Michael's voice was gentle but serious, "there's something I need to tell you about Mr. Thompson." "What?" "He's me." The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced around in my brain like marbles in a jar, refusing to settle into any kind of logical pattern. "What do you mean, he's you?" "I mean, I'm Mr. Thompson. Thompson Consolidated is my company. I'm the one who supposedly bought your house." My legs gave out, and I sank down onto the curb, the phone still pressed to my ear. Around me, the neighborhood was in chaos. Children were running toward the park to see the helicopter. Adults were standing in their yards, pointing and talking excitedly. Mrs. Patterson was taking pictures with her cell phone. And in the middle of it all, I was trying to process the impossible thing Michael had just told me. "You bought my house?" I whispered. "No, I didn't buy your house. But your daughter and son-in-law think I did. They approached my company 3 weeks ago with a proposal. They said they had power of attorney for an elderly woman who wanted to sell her property quickly for cash. They provided all the documentation, including what they claimed was your signature authorizing the sale." "But you knew it was me?" "The moment I saw the address, yes. 1847 Elm Street. How could I forget? That was my home for 8 years. I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of what he was telling me. "So you didn't actually buy it?" I strung them along. I had my lawyers draft preliminary paperwork that looked official enough to satisfy them, but there was never any real transaction. No money changed hands. Your house is still legally yours, Rosalie. It always has been. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I started crying again. So this was all fake? The sale, the new owner, everything? The sale was fake, but their intentions were very real. They were planning to take $600,000 of your money and put you in the cheapest assisted living facility they could find. And they would have gotten away with it if they'd approached any other development company. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me? Because I needed proof of what they were trying to do. I needed them to commit to the fraud completely before I could expose it. And I needed to know for certain that you weren't part of it. The idea that I might have been part of cheating myself was so absurd that I would have laughed if I weren't still in shock. Michael, are you really in that helicopter? I am. And I'm about to walk over there and have a very interesting conversation with your daughter and her husband. But first, I want you to know that you're safe now. You're not losing your house. You're not going to assisted living. And you're not alone. I could see a figure climbing out of the helicopter now, too far away to make out features, but moving with purpose toward our street. They don't know who you are, do they? Kala and Ronan? They know Mr. Thompson from Thompson Consolidated. They don't know that Mr. Thompson used to be the 8-year-old boy who lived in the room next to theirs. Michael, I said, my voice breaking with emotion, I can't believe you're here. I told you I'd always come back if you needed me, didn't I? I made that promise when I left for college, and I meant it. He had promised. On the day he'd moved out to start his freshman year at 18, he'd hugged me goodbye and whispered, "If you ever need anything at all, you call me. I'll always come home for you." I'd thought it was just something kids said. I'd never imagined he meant it literally. "I can see you walking this way," I told him, watching the figure approach down the street. "And I can see you sitting on the curb with the phone to your ear. You're wearing your blue cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons." It was him. It was really him. "Rosalie?" "Yes?" "You might want to put the phone away now. I think it's time for Mr. Thompson to introduce himself to your family." I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my purse, my heart pounding with something that felt like hope for the first time since I'd arrived home. As the figure got closer, I could start to make out features that were familiar, yet changed by time and success. Michael was coming home, and he was about to turn my daughter's world upside down. I watched Michael walk down Elm Street, and with each step he took, I saw less of the boy who'd left for college and more of the man he'd become. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and important decisions. But when our eyes met, his smile was exactly the same as it had been when he was 8 years old. The neighborhood was in complete chaos. Half the residents of our street had gathered in their yards to gawk at the helicopter. Children were running around excitedly, and I could see cell phones everywhere, recording this unprecedented event in our quiet suburban world. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that Michael was here, and I wasn't facing this nightmare alone anymore. "Mrs. Matthews?" His voice carried clearly across the yard as he approached, and he was speaking loudly enough for Calla and Ronan to hear every word. "I'm Michael Thompson from Thompson Consolidated. I believe you're expecting me?" I struggled to my feet from the curb, brushing off my blue cardigan. "Mr. Thompson, yes. Thank you for coming so quickly." He reached me and took my hands in his, squeezing gently. Up close, I could see that his dark eyes still held that same warmth, even though his face had matured into sharp, handsome lines. He was successful. That much was obvious from his expensive suit, the helicopter, the way he carried himself. But he was still my Michael. "I came as soon as I got your message," he said, still speaking in his professional voice for the benefit of our audience. "This situation with your property sale is quite irregular." From the porch, I could see Calla and Ronan frozen in place, watching this interaction with growing confusion and alarm. They'd expected me to be helpless, alone, easily manipulated. They hadn't expected a mysterious businessman to arrive by helicopter to take my side. "Irregular how?" Ronan stepped forward, the manila folder still clutched in his hand. Michael turned to face him, and I saw something I'd never seen before, a coldness in his expression that made me grateful I was on his side. "And you are?" "Ronan Phillips. I'm Mrs. Matthews' son-in-law. I handled the paperwork for the sale of this property to your company." "Ah, yes, Mr. Phillips." Michael's voice was pleasant, but there was steel underneath it. "We need to talk about that paperwork." Calla finally found her voice. "Mr. Thompson," I thought. "We were told you'd already taken possession of the property, that the sale was final." "Were you?" Michael's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's interesting, because according to my legal department, no sale has been finalized. In fact, no money has changed hands at all." The color drained from Ronan's face. "That's impossible. We have a signed contract. We have Mrs. Matthews' power of attorney. Everything was done legally." "I'm sure you believe that," Michael said mildly. "But I'm afraid there are some significant problems with the documentation you provided." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own folder, much thicker than Ronan's, and bound with an official-looking blue cover. "For instance," Michael continued, flipping through pages, "the signature you provided as Mrs. Matthews' authorization doesn't match the signature we have on file from her previous interactions with our company." I stared at him. Previous interactions? But I'd never had any dealings with Thompson Consolidated before today. "What previous interactions?" Calla demanded, echoing my own confusion. Michael smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Mrs. Matthews has been a valued client of mine for several years. She's consulted with our firm on various property investments and estate planning matters. This was news to me, but I tried to keep my face neutral. Whatever Michael was doing, I trusted him completely. That's impossible, Ronan sputtered. She never mentioned any business relationship with your company. Didn't she? Michael looked genuinely surprised. How odd that she wouldn't mention her investment portfolio to her family. Although, given the circumstances, perhaps it was wise of her to keep her financial affairs private. Calla's face was turning red with anger and confusion. What investment portfolio? Mom doesn't have any investments. She lives on Social Security and Dad's pension. Does she? Michael glanced at me with something that might have been amusement. Mrs. Matthews, would you like to tell them, or shall I? I had no idea what he was talking about, but I'd learned to trust Michael's judgment years ago. Perhaps you should explain, Mr. Thompson. They seem confused about my financial situation. Of course. He opened his blue folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. Mrs. Matthews owns a diversified portfolio worth approximately $2.7 million, managed through our investment services division. She also holds partial ownership in 3 rental properties downtown, which generate roughly $12,000 in monthly income. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear a dog barking several blocks away. That's impossible, Calla whispered. I assure you, it's quite possible. Mrs. Matthews has been making very shrewd investments for the past 15 years. She's actually one of our most successful clients. 15 years ago. That would have been right around the time Michael graduated from high school and left for college. I was starting to understand that this elaborate fiction he was constructing was his way of explaining how he could afford to help me, and why I didn't need Calla's protection. If Mom has that much money, Ronan said slowly, why didn't she tell us? Michael's expression hardened. Perhaps because she suspected that certain family members might be more interested in her assets than her well-being. And given today's events, it seems her instincts were correct. Now wait just a minute. Calla stepped down from the porch, her voice rising. We were trying to help her. We were worried about her living alone in this big house. Were you? Michael's tone was conversational, but his eyes were ice. Is that why you forged her signature? Is that why you tried to sell her property for $200,000 below market value? Because you were concerned about her welfare? We didn't forge anything, Ronan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Michael pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. I have 3 handwriting experts who analyzed the signatures you provided. All 3 concluded that they were forgeries. I also have security footage from your office building showing you practicing Mrs. Matthews' signature on multiple occasions. The lie was so smoothly delivered that even I almost believed it. Ronan went pale, and Calla grabbed his arm for support. That's not possible, Ronan stammered. I'm afraid it's very possible. Corporate espionage is a serious concern in our business. We maintain extensive surveillance on all potential partners. Michael's smile was razor-sharp. You'd be amazed what people do when they think no one is watching. You can't prove anything, Calla said, but her voice was shaking. Can't I? Michael pulled out another document. Here's a recording of your phone conversation 3 days ago, where you discussed how to keep Mrs. Matthews from discovering the sale until it was too late. Here's documentation of the bank account you opened to receive the proceeds from the fraudulent sale. And here's evidence that you've been intercepting Mrs. Matthews' mail for weeks, including important financial statements. None of this could possibly be real. Michael had been in Seattle until a few hours ago, but the way Calla and Ronan were reacting, you'd think he had them on video committing murder. This is harassment, Ronan said weakly. No, Mr. Phillips. Harassment is what you've been doing to Mrs. Matthews. What I'm doing is called justice. The small crowd of neighbors had been growing steadily during this conversation. I could see Mrs. Patterson and the Hendersons, Mr. Chen, the young couple from the corner house whose names I could never remember. They were all watching this drama unfold on their peaceful street with fascination and horror. "So what happens now?" Calla asked, and for the first time since I'd arrived home, she sounded uncertain instead of smugly confident. "Now," Michael said pleasantly, "you have two choices. You can voluntarily surrender the fraudulent documents, return any funds you may have already received from other sources based on this scheme, and leave Mrs. Matthews alone permanently. Or I can turn all of this evidence over to the district attorney's office and let them handle it." "We didn't receive any money," Ronan said quickly. "The sale didn't go through." "Didn't it?" Michael tilted his head. "Then how do you explain the $50,000 deposit that was transferred to your personal account yesterday afternoon?" Ronan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Wherever Michael had gotten that information, it was clearly accurate. "I can see you need time to consider your options," Michael continued. "Mrs. Matthews, perhaps you'd like to collect your belongings and come with me? I think you'll be more comfortable staying somewhere else while this matter is resolved." "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere safe." He gestured toward the helicopter, which was still sitting in the park like something out of a movie. "I've arranged temporary accommodations while we sort out the security issues with your home." "Security issues?" "Well, clearly your current locks have been compromised. And given that unauthorized individuals have been living in your house, we'll need to have the entire property swept for listening devices and hidden cameras." Calla gasped. "We weren't living in Mom's house, and we certainly didn't plant any surveillance equipment." "Weren't you?" Michael's expression was innocent. "Then who's been sleeping in the master bedroom? Who's been using Mrs. Matthews's kitchen and eating food purchased with her credit cards?" The accuracy of these accusations was written all over their faces. While I was in Florida, they'd been playing house with my property and my money. "Pack whatever you need for a few days," Michael told me. "My legal team will handle the rest." I looked at my belongings scattered across the lawn, then at my daughter's stricken face, then at the man who'd once been a lost little boy and was now offering to rescue me from the people who should have been taking care of me. "Actually," I said slowly, "I think I have everything I need right here." I picked up the small framed photograph of 8-year-old Michael from among my scattered possessions. In it, he was grinning at the camera after his first day of school, wearing the new clothes I'd bought him and clutching the lunchbox I'd packed with extra care. "Except for this," I added, slipping the picture into my purse. "This is coming with me." Michael's professional mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the boy I'd raised peek through. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. "I'm ready." As we walked toward the helicopter, leaving behind the wreckage of my old life and my daughter's shocked silence, I realized something profound. Home wasn't a building or an address. Home was wherever the people who truly loved you were waiting. And Michael had just given me my home back. The helicopter ride was surreal. I'd never been in one before, and the view of our neighborhood from above made everything look smaller, less significant. I could see my house, my real house that was still legally mine, sitting among the others like a small piece in a puzzle I was finally beginning to understand. Michael wore a headset and was speaking to someone, presumably his pilot or office, in crisp, professional tones. But every few minutes, he'd glance over at me with those same concerned eyes that had watched me from across the breakfast table when he was a child. We landed on the roof of a gleaming downtown building. "Thompson Consolidated," read the large letters across the helipad. As we walked inside, I realized the scope of what Michael had built was far beyond anything I'd imagined. "Mr. Thompson," a young woman in a business suit greeted us as we entered what was obviously the executive floor. "Your 4 o'clock is waiting in Conference Room B, and legal called to say the documents you requested are ready for review." "Thank you, Sarah. Please reschedule the 4 o'clock and ask legal to meet us in my office in 10 minutes. His office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But what caught my attention were the personal touches. A small framed photo of the two of us from his high school graduation, a coffee mug I'd given him that said, "World's Best Son," and sitting prominently on his desk, a handmade pencil holder he'd crafted in middle school shop class. "Sit down, Rosalie," he said gently, gesturing to a comfortable chair. "We have a lot to talk about." "Michael, I need to know the truth. All of it. How long have you known what Calla and Ronan were planning?" He settled into the chair across from me, his expression serious. 3 weeks. Ronan approached my company through intermediaries, trying to set up what he thought was a quick property flip. He presented it as a standard transaction. Elderly homeowner wants to downsize, family handling the details. "But you recognized the address." "The moment I saw it. 1847 Elm Street." His voice softened. "How could I forget the address where I learned what home meant?" "Why didn't you call me immediately?" "Because I needed to know how deep this went. I needed proof that would hold up in court if necessary." He reached for a thick folder on his desk. "And I needed to protect you in a way that couldn't be undone." He opened the folder, and I saw documents with official seals, photographs, and what looked like bank statements. This wasn't their first attempt, Rosalie. They've been setting this up for months. My heart sank. "What do you mean?" 6 months ago, Ronan took out a second mortgage on their house. The monthly payments are $2,400, which is more than they can afford on his salary. They're also carrying $45,000 in credit card debt. He pulled out a bank statement with Calla's name on it. 4 months ago, Calla opened a new checking account. Look at the deposits. I scanned the numbers and my blood ran cold. These are the same amounts as my pension checks. Exactly. She's been intercepting your mail and depositing your Social Security payments into her personal account. You've been living off your savings without realizing it. But I never gave her access to my mail. She used the power of attorney you signed after your mini-stroke. She told the post office she was helping you manage your affairs during your recovery. Legal, but unethical. I felt sick. How much has she stolen? Approximately $19,000 over the past 4 months. But that was just the beginning. He pulled out more documents. 3 weeks ago, they approached a private care facility called Sunset Manor. They put down a deposit for a shared room, the cheapest option available. The monthly fee is $1,800, which would be paid from your pension. The difference would go straight into their pockets. A shared room? The humiliation was almost worse than the theft. They were going to put me in a shared room in the cheapest facility they could find? While living in your house and spending the $600,000 they thought they were getting from the sale. I leaned back in the chair, trying to process the magnitude of their betrayal. It wasn't just about money or housing. They'd planned to strip away every shred of my independence and dignity. "There's more," Michael said gently. "I had my security team examine your house while we were confronting them. They found some disturbing things." "What kind of things?" "Hidden cameras in your bedroom and bathroom." I gasped, my hand flying to my throat where my pearl necklace rested. "Cameras?" "They've been monitoring you, Rosalie. Recording your daily routines, your phone calls, your private moments. We found hours of footage on Ronan's computer." The violation was so complete, so intimate, that I couldn't speak for several moments. "Why?" I finally whispered. "They were building a case to have you declared mentally incompetent. The footage shows you talking to yourself, which is normal behavior that they were planning to present as evidence of dementia. They recorded you forgetting where you put your glasses, struggling with technology, having trouble opening jars. But those are normal things that happen to everyone." "Exactly. But taken out of context and presented by family members claiming to be concerned about your welfare, they could have convinced a judge that you needed a legal guardian." "A guardian?" "Someone to control your finances and make decisions about your care. Someone like Calla." The full scope of their plan was becoming clear, and it was more sinister than I'd imagined. They hadn't just wanted to steal from me. They'd wanted to make it legal. "Michael, how did you find all this out so quickly?" For the first time since we'd entered his office, he looked uncomfortable. "I've been keeping an eye on your family for years, Rosalie. After I left for college, I worried about you. I hired a private security firm to do occasional check-ins, make sure you were safe. You've been watching me? Not watching, protecting. After everything you did for me, I wanted to make sure you were okay. When Kala married Ronan, my investigators found some troubling things about his background. What kind of troubling things? He's done this before. His first wife divorced him after discovering he'd forged her name on loan documents. His elderly aunt had to get a restraining order against him when she caught him stealing from her purse. There's a pattern of financial abuse that goes back years. I thought about all the times Ronan had offered to help me with my paperwork, all the occasions when he'd suggested I was getting too old to handle my own affairs. Why didn't you tell me? Not because you seemed happy. Kala was visiting regularly. You had family close by. I thought maybe I was being overprotective. Until 3 weeks ago, when he walked into my company trying to steal your house. A knock on the door interrupted us. Mr. Thompson, legal is here. Send them in. 2 lawyers entered, a man and woman both carrying briefcases and wearing serious expressions. Mrs. Matthews, the woman said, I'm Jennifer Walsh, and this is David Chen. We're going to walk you through your options regarding your daughter and son-in-law's attempted fraud. Options? David Chen opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. You can press criminal charges for forgery, identity theft, mail fraud, and elder abuse. The evidence is overwhelming. They would almost certainly face jail time. Or, Jennifer Walsh continued, you can pursue civil remedies. Force them to repay what they've stolen, plus damages, and obtain restraining orders to prevent future contact. Or, David Chen added, you can do nothing legally but take steps to protect yourself going forward. New bank accounts, changed locks, updated power of attorney documents. I looked at Michael, who was watching me with patient concern. What do you think I should do? I think, he said carefully, that you should do whatever feels right to you, whatever gives you the most peace. Peace. That's what I wanted more than revenge, more than justice, more than vindication. I wanted peace. If I press criminal charges, will there be a trial? Will this all become public? Probably, Jennifer Walsh said. Elder abuse cases often attract media attention. I thought about sitting in a courtroom, having my private life dissected by strangers, seeing my story in the newspapers. I thought about having to testify against my own daughter, no matter how much she'd betrayed me. I don't want a trial, I said finally, but I do want them to face consequences. What kind of consequences? David Chen asked. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman I'd been when I'd raised Kala and the woman I'd become while raising Michael. The difference wasn't in how much love I'd given. I'd loved them both completely. The difference was in what I'd expected in return. I want them to repay every penny they've stolen, with interest. I want them banned from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. And I want them to know that they've lost me forever. That's all doable, Jennifer Walsh said. We can have the documents drawn up by tomorrow. And my house? Is yours, Michael said firmly. Always has been. The sale documents were never filed because there was never a real sale. You can move back in whenever you're ready. What about the cameras? The locks? Already handled. My security team swept the entire house and changed all the locks. Your home is secure. I reached into my purse and pulled out the framed photograph of 8-year-old Michael, the one I'd rescued from my scattered belongings on the sidewalk. Do you remember when this was taken? I asked him. He smiled. First day of 3rd grade. You made me pancakes for breakfast and packed my lunch with a note that said, "Have a great day, sweetheart." You kept every single one of those notes. I found them in your room after you left for college, in a shoebox under your bed. I still have them, he said softly. In my apartment. Some people collect stamps or coins. I collected proof that I was loved. The lawyers exchanged glances and quietly excused themselves, sensing this had become a private moment. Michael, Why did you become so successful? Was it to prove something to Calla and her father? No, he said without hesitation. I became successful because you taught me that I was worth something. You showed me what it felt like to be valued, and I wanted to make sure I could always take care of you the way you took care of me. You didn't owe me anything. I didn't owe you. I chose you. Just like you chose me when no one else would. I looked around his magnificent office, at the empire he'd built, at the man he'd become despite the worst possible start in life. What happens now? Now you decide what you want your life to look like. You're free, Rosalie. You're safe, you're financially secure, and you never have to see Calla and Ronan again if you don't want to. And you? Will you disappear back to Seattle now that the crisis is over? Actually, he smiled, I've been thinking about relocating my headquarters. This city has some very appealing qualities. Such as? The best mother a man could ask for lives here. I started crying then, not from sadness or anger or fear, but from relief. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt truly safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. I was with someone who loved me unconditionally, who would never hurt me, who saw me as valuable just for being myself. The truth wasn't just that Calla and Ronan had tried to steal from me. The truth was that I'd been living with people who didn't value me, while the person who treasured me most had been waiting patiently for me to need him. I wasn't just getting my house back. I was getting my life back. And this time, I was going to share it with people who deserved it. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, making pancakes from scratch while Michael read the newspaper at my kitchen table. The morning light streamed through the windows I'd cleaned myself the day before, casting warm patterns across the floor where he used to sit with his homework 20 years ago. Some things had changed. The locks were different, stronger. My mail now went to a post office box that only Michael and I knew about. My bank accounts had been moved to a different institution entirely, with passwords that Calla could never guess. The house had been swept for surveillance devices 3 times, and a discreet security system now monitored all entry points. But the important things remained the same. The kitchen still smelled like vanilla and cinnamon when I baked. The floorboards still creaked in exactly the same places. My rose garden had survived my 3-month absence and was blooming more beautifully than ever. The business section has an interesting article about sustainable development, Michael said, not looking up from his paper. Apparently, Thompson Consolidated just broke ground on a new affordable housing project. Imagine that, I replied, flipping a pancake. I hope they're treating their workers fairly. Oh, I'm sure they are. I heard the CEO is very particular about employee benefits. This had become our Sunday morning routine. Michael stayed over on Saturday nights in his old room, which I'd left exactly as it was when he'd gone to college. We'd have breakfast together, work in the garden, maybe drive to the farmer's market or catch an afternoon movie. He'd bought a house 15 minutes away, nothing ostentatious, just a comfortable place where he could host company dinners for his relocated staff. But most evenings, he'd stop by to check on things, and we'd end up having dinner together and talking until late. It was the family life I'd dreamed of having with Calla but had never quite achieved. The legal settlement had been finalized 6 weeks ago. Calla and Ronan had agreed to repay the $19,000 they'd stolen, plus $12,000 in damages and legal fees. They'd signed restraining orders that prohibited them from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my property. In return, I'd agreed not to press criminal charges. I'd received 1 letter from Calla since then, forwarded through the lawyers. It was 3 pages of justifications and self-pity, explaining how they'd only been trying to help me, how I was being manipulated by Michael, how families should forgive each other's mistakes. I'd read it once, then burned it in my fireplace. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay that way. "Are you expecting anyone today?" Michael asked, glancing toward the front window. "Not that I know of. Why?" "There's a car I don't recognize parked across the street. Woman sitting inside looks like she's watching the house." I moved to the window and peered through the curtains. My heart sank when I recognized the blue sedan and the figure hunched over the steering wheel. It's Calla. Michael was beside me instantly, his expression hardening. How long has she been there? I don't know, I just noticed her. She's violating the restraining order just by being here. I watched my daughter sitting alone in her car, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. She looked smaller somehow, older. The confident woman who'd thrown me out of my own house had been replaced by someone who looked lost and desperate. But then I remembered the cameras in my bedroom, the forged signatures, the months of stolen pension checks, and the sympathy faded. "What do you want to do?" Michael asked. "I can call the police, or my security team." I thought about it. I could have her arrested, could make her face the consequences of violating the court order. I could create a scene that would humiliate her the way she'd humiliated me, but that wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be. "I want to talk to her," I said finally. "Rosalie, that's not a good idea. She's not supposed to be here and you don't owe her anything." "I don't owe her a conversation, but I owe myself one." Michael studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll be right here if you need me." I walked outside and across the street, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Calla saw me coming and rolled down her car window, her eyes red with tears. "Mom, please, I just want to talk." "You're not supposed to be here, Calla." "I know, but I had to see you. I had to explain." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. She was 45 years old, but she seemed younger, like a child who'd been caught doing something wrong and couldn't understand why everyone was so upset. "There's nothing to explain," I said quietly. "I know exactly what you did and why you did it. We needed the money, Mom. Ronan lost his job and we're drowning in debt. We thought you had more than enough, and you wouldn't even miss it. You thought I wouldn't miss my house, my independence, my dignity? We were going to visit you all the time at the assisted living place. You would have made friends, had people to take care of you." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Calla, you put cameras in my bedroom. You stole my mail. You forged my signature. None of that was about taking care of me." She flinched. "That was Ronan's idea. I told him it was going too far. But you didn't stop him." Silence stretched between us. Finally, Calla spoke again, her voice small and broken. "I was always jealous of Michael. From the day you brought him home, I knew you loved him more than me." "That's not true." "Yes, it is." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You lit up when he walked into her room. You never looked at me that way." I thought about that, really considered it. Had I treated them differently? "Maybe I did love differently," I said finally. "But not more or less. I loved you as my daughter, someone I was responsible for raising and shaping. I loved Michael as someone who needed rescuing. Those are different kinds of love, but they're both real. He was always your favorite. He was never my favorite. He was my choice. Just like this situation was your choice." Calla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What do you mean?" "You chose to see my love for Michael as something taken away from you instead of something added to our family. You chose to resent him instead of appreciating him. And when you needed money, you chose to steal from me instead of asking for help. You wouldn't have given us $600,000. No, I wouldn't have. But I might have helped you refinance your house or find a financial counselor or figure out a payment plan for your debts. You never gave me the chance." "Would you have? Really?" I considered the question honestly. "I don't know, but we'll never find out now, will we?" "Mom, please. I know I messed up, but I'm still your daughter. Doesn't that count for something?" I looked at this woman who shared my DNA but had never really known me, who had seen me as a source of resources rather than a person with feelings and needs. "Being my daughter was supposed to mean something to you," I said quietly. It was supposed to mean that you protected me, not exploited me. It was supposed to mean that you wanted me to be happy and safe, not convenient and compliant. I can change. We can start over. No, Calla, we can't. Because of Michael? Because he's poisoned you against me? Because of you. Because of the choices you made and the person you chose to be. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my pearl necklace, the one I'd been nervously fingering during every stressful moment of this entire ordeal. I'd worn it every day since my wedding 47 years ago, through good times and bad, as a connection to my mother and grandmother before her. This belonged to your great-grandmother, I said, holding it up so the morning light caught the lustrous surface. She gave it to my mother, who gave it to me on my wedding day. I always planned to give it to you. Calla's eyes widened with hope. But pearls are created through pressure and irritation, I continued. Something gets inside the oyster that doesn't belong, and instead of rejecting it, the oyster covers it with layers of beauty until it becomes something valuable. Mom, I don't understand. You were the irritation, Calla. You were the pressure that taught me what I was really made of. And what I learned is that I'm stronger than I ever knew, and I deserve better than you were willing to give me. I fastened the necklace back around my throat where it belonged. I'm not giving this to you. I'm going to will it to Michael's future wife, or his daughter if he has one. Someone who understands that family means protection, not exploitation. You're really going to cut me out completely? Your own flesh and blood? I'm choosing to surround myself with people who value me. That's what you taught me to do. I turned and walked back toward my house, where Michael was waiting on the porch, ready to support me or defend me or simply hold me if that's what I needed. Mom! Calla called after me. This isn't over! I stopped and turned around one last time. Yes, it is. I walked up my porch steps, through my front door, into my kitchen where the pancakes were still warm, and the coffee was still hot, and the newspaper was still spread across the table where my chosen son was waiting for me. How do you feel? Michael asked as I sat down across from him. I thought about it seriously. I felt sad for the relationship Calla and I would never have. I felt angry about the trust that had been broken. I felt relieved that the confrontation was over, but mostly I felt free. I feel like I finally understand the difference between family and relatives, I said. What's the difference? Family is what you build. Relatives are just what you're born with. Michael smiled and passed me the syrup. In that case, I'm honored to be your family. The honor is mine. We finished our breakfast in comfortable silence, planning our day like we'd been doing this for decades instead of months. Later, we'd work in the garden together. Michael would help me plant new roses in the spot where the security cameras had been hidden. We'd have dinner on the patio and watch the sunset from chairs positioned so we could see the street but not be easily seen from it. It was a quiet life, a peaceful life. Some might even call it ordinary, but after everything I'd been through, ordinary felt like victory. I was 71 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged, with people who chose to love me as much as I chose to love them. At 71 years old, I'd finally learned that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. And I was finally making the right ones. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.